studio by Chris Wheaton, Managing Director of Stifel. Now, you were taking part in the plenary session this morning, and so there were some very strong key messages that came out of that session, I felt. And when you were speaking, I was hearing a real demand for flexibility in the industry, that being crucial going forward.
I think that's absolutely right. What we're seeing is an environment, certainly in the UK North Sea, where we've got a big energy transition to negotiate, on top of which we've got the fiscal and political uncertainty that we're having to navigate at the moment, and that's just a fact of life. One thing I'm really keen on companies thinking about is how to think like their businesses, not as energy producers, but as manufacturers. So think of their businesses in the same way as like a high value added manufacturing business would, like, for example, the automotive industry. And stealing ideas from them, as Oscar Wilde said, talent borrows, genius steals. And I think the kind of just-in-time manufacturing, the very key tolerance, very tight tolerances the industry runs to, I think could be really helpful in making them as lean and as flexible as possible for what is a very wide range of potential outcomes over the next 5 years, let alone the next 10 years. And I think that flexibility is absolutely key.
What you're talking about is a fundamental change in mindset, isn't it?
It is, and I think we're seeing some of that in the exhibition today, where you talk about the digitization of the industry, and I think that's a really key step, because you can't control what you can't measure. And I think digitization is a really interesting way of trying to build flexibility into an organization by having better data, better information as to how you're running, whether it's even down to an individual well, or even individual producing horizons within an individual well. I think the opportunity there of being able to gather a lot more data and use it a lot more smartly in a traditional business. The opportunities there are really enormous in terms of being able to maximize resource recovery, which is absolutely key. Minimize environmental footprint, again, absolutely key, and also make yourself as flexible as possible in terms of costs, and make sure you're resilient. Build yourself into being a resilient organization for what, as I said, is a wide range of outcomes.
You mentioned opportunities, and of course we hear a lot, don't we, about the opportunities that need to be taken or the challenges that need to be met. But are we, as an energy industry, doing that quickly enough?
I think the answer is you can never do it quickly enough. I mean, the opportunity, for offshore energy is here and now in terms of, for example, green hydrogen, offshore wind, and also particularly I think CCS, where I think the UK really could be a global leader in not just CCS for a domestic market, but also as a place where storage resource is available for lots of Europe that doesn't have its own ability to capture and store carbon. And that's going to be a nascent industry that doesn't really exist now, but is going to be vital to decarbonising the world in the next 20 to 30 years. And there's some industries like steel, like cement, where carbon emissions are an intrinsic part of the process. And so capturing that, abating that, is going to be quickest way of reducing carbon than it is of re-engineering the process. Like, for example, trying to come up with CO2-free cement, for example, or retrofitting direct hydrogen injection into steel furnaces, for example. You're going to have to try, if you want to reduce carbon as quickly as possible, it's better to retrofit on what you've already got than try and innovate far too quickly. It's a mix of innovation and that retrofit that I think is going to give the opportunity, particularly for CCS in the UK, over the next 20, 30 years.
It's incredible when we talk about blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, CCUS. It's 4 years since we met at Offshore Europe. And now we have these discussions and we mention these terms and these new technologies that just trip off our tongue. How time has flown in these past 4 years. What would be your hopes for outcomes from Offshore Europe of 2023?
Well, let's fast forward to Offshore Europe 2027, shall we? Not 4 years. Look 4 years back. But let's look 4 years in advance. Where would we want to be? I'd like us to think the UK is less than 12 months away from first injection of CO2 into a storage scheme. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see the first prototype green hydrogen plants offshore I'd love there to be much more collaboration on sharing of offshore infrastructure for offshore wind, not offshore energy generally. So using existing infrastructure to help build out that new energy infrastructure we'll need in the next 20 or 30 years. That and a lot more digitization. And one of the other things I picked up a lot on today is there's a real concern about where talent is going to come from. The future engineering and technical graduates and technicians and people who are going to be expert in what they do, and making sure that energy isn't seen as very much a 20th century career that doesn't have a future. I think that's one of the key concerns that's come out for me of my discussions this morning, walking around the exhibition, the stands today. And I hope in 4 years' time we can look back and say, yeah, the energy industry is winning the war on talent against all the other things that graduates and the people we need for the next 30 years could be able to do.
Well, we shall have to meet at the next Offshore Europe and see where we are. Chris, thank you very much for joining us.
See you in 4 years' time.
Thank you.
Bye.